Thank you, Senator Udo. Mr. Elwell, there were a couple of factual issues that came up during the course of the hearing that we're going to follow up with written questions and ask you to clarify. One factual issue on which there was dispute, as you and I discussed, the New York Times and others have reported that on the earlier versions of the 737, when you pull back the yoke, that it disengaged the stabilization system, but that did not happen on the 737 MAX. Your testimony to me, if I understood correctly, was that was not correct, although I heard Chairman Sumwalt disagree on that point. So we're going to ask you in writing to clarify how the system operates. I think it's important to have a shared set, an agreed set of facts, and to understand. Likewise, when I asked you about the simulations that pilots did as part of the certification, I asked in particular if any of those simulations involved a faulty sensor producing faulty data and how to respond to it. My recollection is you were not certain as to the answer of that, so I'm going to ask you to go and verify and give us a clear answer to that. I want to read to you some portions of an article from Reuters from March 19th, 2019, that purports to describe what happened on the Lion Air crash. And Reuters reported, quote, "The pilots of a doomed Lion Air Boeing 737 MAX scrambled through a handbook to understand why the jet was lurching downwards in the final minutes before it hit the water, killing all 189 people on board. 3 people with knowledge of the cockpit voice reporter content said." The article goes on to describe, "The captain was at the controls of Lion Air flight JT-610 when the nearly new jet took off from Jakarta, and the first officer was handling the radio, according to a preliminary report issued in November. Just 2 minutes into the flight, the first officer reported a, quote, flight control problem to the air traffic control and said the pilots intended to maintain an altitude of 5,000 feet. The first officer did not specify the problem, but one source said airspeed was mentioned and on the cockpit voice recording, and a second source said an indicator showed a problem on the captain's display, but not on the first officer's. The captain asked the first officer to check the quick reference handbook, which contains checklist for abnormal events, the first source said. For the next 9 minutes, the jet warned the pilot it was in a stall and pushed the nose down in response, the report showed. A stall is when the airflow over a plane's wing is too weak to generate lift and keep it flying. The captain fought to climb, but the computer, still incorrectly sensing a stall, continued to push the nose down using the plane's trim system. Normally, trim adjusts an aircraft's control surfaces to ensure it flies straight and level. They didn't seem to know the trim was moving down, the third source said. They thought only about airspeed and altitude. That was the only thing they talked about. Do you have any reason to doubt that account of what occurred in the final minutes of that flight?
Well, Senator, the information I have is that actually there has not been, and I would defer to Chairman Sumwalt on this, but
please chime in as well.
That the cockpit voice recorder is not available to. I certainly haven't seen a readout on it, and if I did, to Chairman Sumwalt's point earlier, I wouldn't be at the liberty to even talk about it. But I would, and this actually is linked to what you said earlier about the confusion about whether the 737 MAX, when you pull back, it stops. And I will admit to not having flown it and maybe not getting that right. But what certainly, and I will react to what you read, but I will qualify it by saying it is entirely possible that what was written is not accurate. But I will tell you, as I said numerous times in this hearing, pilots of large aircraft are trained from day one when the pitch of the aircraft is doing something you're not telling it to do. You do runaway pitch trim checklist. And in every plane I've ever flown, it's called a memory item. You're not fumbling through books. It's a time-critical procedure, and you go to that. You do it in the sim when you fly. It's a memory item. So some of what you read there, I can't tell you if that's accurate. I can't tell you if that's straight from the investigation of CVR. It disturbs me because it is not the way I was trained and what I would expect pilots to do in that situation.
Do you have any explanation for why something like this might have happened, if the report is accurate? Look, I'm not a pilot, but certainly the picture that is painted there of the pilot frantically looking through the checklist as the nose continues to adjust downward, and as the pilot is unable to correct that problem, that is not an image that instills comfort or confidence, and it does not suggest that the pilot is aware of how to correct for the system that is adjusting the nose downward. Do you have any explanation in terms of the training that pilots undergo, how that would come to be?
Mr. Chairman, it would be inappropriate for me to comment any further on, first, an article whose veracity I can't ascertain right now, no, I have no comment on other than, yes, it sounds like a terrible situation, but I have no way of knowing that account is accurate. So it would be inappropriate for me to comment on it.
But there's nothing in the pilot training that the FAA required about the MCAS system and how to correct for it. Is that accurate?
Senator, the MCAS is not something you fly. It's not something you would get in a simulator and fly the MCAS. So
I didn't say you'd fly the MCAS. I said there's nothing in the pilot training about the MCAS system adjusting the nose of the plane downward and how to compensate for that in the event of a malfunctioning sensor. Is that accurate, that the training does not include that?
Senator, I would actually say that it is accounted for in the training. And the accounting for that in the training is that MCAS, inappropriate input of the MCAS is runaway pitch trim. And runaway pitch trim is trained and trained and trained by every pilot who flies a large aircraft.
Chairman Sumwalt, do you have any additional points on this line of inquiry?
No, sir, I do not.
Okay. One final avenue of questions, Mr. Scovel. I want to draw your attention to a June 22nd, 2012 memorandum from your office titled FAA Transport Airplane Directorate, Seattle, Washington. Are you familiar with this document?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chairman.
Good. The 2012 memorandum specifically state that your office's investigation, quote, substantiated employee allegations that TAD, which is the FAA's Transport Airplane Directorate, and FAA headquarters managers have not always supported TAD employee efforts to hold Boeing accountable. And it further discusses TAD employee concerns that Boeing employees in the Boeing Certificate Office might have, quote, delivery of airplanes as part of their performance standards. The concerns described in that memo paint a troubling picture of agency capture. Do the concerns in the 2012 memo, do you still have those concerns? And do you see an ongoing pattern like that described in the 2012 memo?
Mr. Chairman, I'm confident they fully described my office's findings at the time in actually 2010, 2011, and early 2012 as we were doing the investigation work that led to that memorandum from the Office of Inspector General to FAA. I don't know in 2019 whether those conditions still prevail.
Well, this subcommittee will eagerly await your investigation and assessment of that question because it is a critical question for evaluating ongoing safety. Senator Blumenthal.